What's up, everybody, and welcome back to All the Things Sort of Truth, the podcast where we get down to the truth of the Sort of Truth series as written by Terry Goodkind. I'm Nate.
And I'm Jade.
And in this episode, we're getting into Chapter 6 of Wizard's First Rule. How are you doing, JD?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited for this chapter.
I know, me too. This is where, well, we'll get to it.
Yes. First, I'm going to get into a little bit of news for you. We don't really actually have any new news. The only thing I want to get into a little bit is some of the answers that we all got on the Ask Me Anything in the Terry Goodkind Sort of Truth Book Club group.
It's a long name.
Yes, it is. The first thing that I'm going to mention is just that if you have been waiting, like hotly anticipating the next book in the Law of Nine series, you're going to be disappointed because apparently his publishers made him scrap that because there was not enough interest.
Now, I saw him say that on Facebook, but does that mean if there comes more interest, that it's still a dead project?
The way he made it sound was like he couldn't go back into it, so I'm wondering if the publishing group holds the rights to that book, so he's not allowed to, like, touch it.
Okay, damn. All right. I enjoyed that book. Just saying. And let us know if you guys did too.
Yeah, we've talked a couple times about the further flung implications of those books and what all we could get into with them, and we'll never know now. So that kind of sucks. And tied into that, the Nikki Chronicles have apparently been killed after book 4. So that's a shame. There apparently was not enough interest in that to keep that series going. I'm not sure, again, if because it's still an active book, if that's like completely decided he's not able to, or if the fans start leaving reviews and buying the books, if that could change. I mean, I know that we've bought all of them, and I've seen a whole bunch of people post about it on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we had mentioned that in an earlier episode, how we like the offshoot series. We like all of them. I mean, we always miss Richard and Kaylin, and we don't want to sacrifice those books for other books. But we loved reading about Nikki, and we loved reading about Alex Rawl, too.
Right, so it's going to be a super big shame if we lose both series because there wasn't enough interest online. The only other thing that I'm going to mention, because there's way too much to get into, if you haven't checked out those answers, you definitely should go on there on the group. There's still a post somewhere. I don't think it's pinned anymore, but if you type in AMA answers, you should be able to find it. Tons of really interesting stuff that he puts in there. He doesn't drink alcohol. He tells you how to pronounce a couple different things. It's really interesting. The last thing I'm going to mention is just that somebody asked him if there's any hidden messages or secrets in his book that few people, if anyone, has caught on to. And he says there's one thing from the very beginning that no one has ever caught or mentioned, and he's actually quite surprised by that. And then a little bit later, somebody asked what it was, and he said, no one will ever tell. Somebody else, actually, Nate and somebody else on this group said that they thought maybe that was a hint.
I mean, that's a very odd way of answering that specific question. I feel like that in itself may have been a hint. I mean, he won't say, probably, but damn, I hope it is. Because now I'm going to start pouring through this book even faster to figure out if that relates to anything at all in this book. On top of that, if you guys think you might know something that relates, let us know. Write us an email, hit us up on the Facebook. Let's figure this thing out.
Right, let's be the first ones to crack it. I just thought that those were a couple interesting things to bring up, and now we can get into the chapter.
All right, well, we tried a few times to bring up the fact that in one of these fucking chapters, my favorite character gets introduced. And finally, we're here, guys. It was chapter 6 all along. Ha! Fooled you. In this chapter, we finally get to meet Richard's buddy, Zedd. And I love Zedd so much. I feel like I have the most in common with him. I would like to say that I have the most in common with Richard. You know, super logical, probably diamond cut abs, but that's just not the way of it. Zedd is my dude, and I am just so happy that we finally get to introduce him to all of you. Should we get into it?
Yeah.
All right.
So, Thornbite definitely making Richard sick at this point. He knows he has to get to Zedd, and hopefully that motherfucker can help.
Yeah, it's really just his best option at this point. There's no guarantee that Zedd can fix anything. The other thing that was odd about this whole thing with the bite is that he doesn't tell Kaylin that it's a pretty severe issue.
Right. He's keeping this all to himself.
Which is probably not a smart thing to do if you think about it. You're out running in the woods with this woman, excuse me. And suppose you have a severe reaction and this thing starts killing you. She has no idea what the problem might be at all. And she'd be completely unable to help you.
Right. She might just start shaking your shoulders and yelling in your face.
Right. Or doing nothing kind of like you did to help her. Bet you that won't work twice.
At this point, Kaylin is literally just picking flowers. Richard doesn't know why. She's just picking wildflowers. So he decides to go pick some apples, because that's what you do when you're dying from a thorn bite.
Right. Well, you gotta eat.
Yeah, true. And apparently you have to bring food to Zedd.
That's right. It's always a good idea to bring food when you visit Zedd. Which I think is another thing we have in common. We are always hungry.
I was going to say, it's probably a good idea to bring food, like, just in general, when you go places. Like, I like food. You come to visit me, you bringing me food, I'm going to be in a lot better mood.
Yeah.
Finally, we figured out what Kaylin's doing. She's sending a raft of flowers out onto the river. It's going to be an offering to the spirits of their mothers to help them find the Great Wizard. And I don't know. I kind of thought she was doing something for Shar at first, so it threw me off a little bit, just because it was like a Lord of the Rings moment.
Kind of like a river pyre.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of had the same idea too, but that's not what was going on here. But it would have been appropriate.
Yeah, I feel like it would have. I mean, this I guess is too. I definitely thought it was a in memory of type thing.
Yeah.
Richard offers her an apple, and she loses her shit.
Yeah. Richard offers her the apple, and she smacks the apple out of his hand with her one hand while grabbing his throat with her other hand. And he's like, Kaylin, what the fuck? Sorry, what's going on? And he immediately apologizes, and he's like, what, you don't like apples?
I can get you something else. Sorry,
Right.
man. And he immediately is like, I better not move. I don't know why, but this chick creeps me out a little bit.
So we find out at this point, after Kaylin calms down, and Richard is like, this is an apple, and you can eat it, that all red fruit in the Midlands is poisonous.
So it makes sense why she freaked the fuck out. Because she was like, dude, no. I'm not going to eat poison, asshole.
My one question here is that she smacks the apple out of his hand for offering it to her, but she showed zero concern at the fact that he was probably eating an apple when he did that. She's like, you can eat it, but I'm not going to eat it.
I don't think he was eating it yet, because then he takes a bite out of it after, like, once he explains that it's an apple, he takes a bite, and he's like, see?
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm not dying. Take a bite. And she's like, oh, yeah, these are pretty good. Can you imagine not having an apple until you're that old? Not tasting that?
Yeah, like picking apples in the fall and just doing that whole apple pie. Apple pie, it's an American thing.
Apple cider? Apple juice? Actually, my favorite thing is like green apple or caramel apple anything, so I would be sad.
So it's at this point that Kaylin touches Richard's forehead, and she realizes that he's burning up. And the fact that they have to get to his buddy Zedd becomes pretty imminent and very apparent to her. This is not something that's a passive mission or a side mission. It has to fucking happen now.
And I'm sure for her to have even touched him in the first place like that, he probably was starting to look a little rough, because she doesn't touch people often.
Right. That's kind of a through line with Kaylin so far.
So, Zedd's house comes into view pretty quickly after this, though, luckily. And the first thing that's mentioned is a ramp that his cat uses to get up and down on the roof. And I loved that little side note, because he built a fucking ramp for his cat. And his reason chair is out front. Richard thinks to himself, as he sees Zedd's reason chair, that that's where he sits to think about things. And it made me think of Blue's Clues and the thinking chair, where we sit and think. I
was wondering why you had think written 3 times in the notes. It goes into a little bit of detail about this chair, too. It says Zedd once sat in this chair for 3 days straight, trying to answer the question of why people argue about how many stars there are in the sky. And so it takes him 3 days to think about it and figure it out and come up with a good reason. Then that's just as long as he's going to sit there. Once he figured it out, it was basically because nobody can prove how many stars there are in the sky. So nobody can really say that you're wrong. And he's like, all right, figured it out. We're done here. And then he goes in and just stuffs his face for hours at a time.
Just binge ate.
But that does go to show that this guy goes deep. When he thinks about something, he doesn't have time to stop and eat. My real question is, he didn't go to the bathroom either?
He held it.
He just held that shit for 3 days.
Literally.
Literally held that shit. It's a small house with a porch that runs along the front of it. But Zedd's not there in his chair, so Richard knows that he must be around back on his cloud rock.
Yes. And this is the first time that we actually get a glimpse of old Zedd.
As we come around the house, we find Zedd standing on his rock, just like Richard thought he would be, but he's butt-ass naked. It doesn't happen this way in the book, but in the TV show, he's holding a chicken, which is somehow funnier. But either way, he's just naked, and Zedd's like, Richard, I knew you'd be coming, and he is not ashamed at all of his nakedness. He's just like, whatever, it's, I'm just naked. And Richard starts telling Zedd that, we've got company. And Zedd is just like, never mind that. I don't care. He knows somebody else is with him. Does not give a fuck that his ass is hanging out.
Yeah, no shits. He's like, dude, did you see the clouds? I know you could see my ass, but did you see the clouds? And Richard's like, yeah, there's one that's been following me for a couple days. Get your fucking robe on.
It was funny because Richard, gets the robe himself and dresses Zedd in front of Kaylin. And Zedd is just talking away, and he's not really paying much attention while Richard struggles to dress this guy.
What's really funny to me is that he stays turned around for most of this conversation. But before Richard can get the robe around him, he does whip around and gives, full frontal. So it's not even it's my back and my butt, not a big deal. It's he's like, whatever, this is who I am.
This is me.
This is all of me. Take it in, guys. But he does mention that it has not been days. It's been following you for 3 weeks since your father's death. And he says his little punchline, bags, for the first time right there, too. And Richard is like, don't swear, which is in reference to bags, I'm assuming. He also asks Richard if he knows where the clouds came from.
That's right. In an earlier chapter, Richard mentions that Zedd is a cloud reader, and that's how you find missing people. Now, it doesn't go into any details of how he finds people by watching the clouds, but that's obviously what he's referencing here. And that this cloud has obviously been following Richard, which Richard has noticed, for 3 weeks. And then he tells him that this cloud is from Dahara. But my question is, how would he know that?
Zedd goes into a little bit of detail about cloud formations and a whole bunch of details about that, and Richard says that he figured it out through independent information. I'm thinking, because I had the same question, how did Richard come to that conclusion, that it was from Dahara? Because he just learned about Dahara pretty much for the first time in the last chapter. I'm thinking that because Shar said that Darkenral was after him.
So then he probably put 2 and 2 together.
Yes. He probably just assumes that it's Darkenral following him. I think it might be a little bit of a leap, but it is Richard. He's a pretty logical guy, and he picks up on the truth pretty good. I probably wouldn't have gotten there that quick.
Yeah, no. And while all of this is going on, Zedd is still completely unconcerned about Kaylin. And Richard's trying to get through this weird cloud conversation that they're having, and also trying to point out to Zedd that there's another person here. Damn it. Look.
Acknowledge my friend.
Right.
Zedd, I'm pretty sure, has ADD. He says, did your info tell you this was bad? Yes, of course it did.